Switched On IT is proudly brought to you by Computer Troubleshooters Toowoomba West and Oz Hosting, Cloud Made Easy.
Welcome to Switched On IT. This is the show where we talk about everything IT. I'm Barry. This show we are going to talk to, or at least Doug and Ray are going to talk about how to host your first webinar or your first online meeting. They're going to talk about the tools that you need in the current situation with COVID-19 and lots of businesses having to work from home. We're seeing lots of people hosting webinars and things using programs like Zoom, but there are lots of others out there, have been for a long time. And so today we're going to talk to you about how to set up a virtual meeting and what tools you need and what things you need to think about when you're setting up an online meeting. Doug and Ray, Doug from Oz Hosting in Sydney and Ray from W3 Consulting in Washington, D.C. With us live. I think they're there now. Yes, gentlemen, I believe you are going to talk to us about hosting an online meeting today. Pretty critical when we're seeing all kinds of working from home and things like that during this COVID-19 shutdown. So tell us, Ray, what do we need to do in order to have a successful online meeting?
Sure. So, I think that, one of the things that both Doug and I are aware of is that people are meeting their family members through various consumer platforms, and that's great for being able to connect and across this social distancing moment in time. And we also need to run our businesses sometimes from that perspective. And I think a lot of people will be able to use this after the global pandemic subsides and we go back to some sense of normalcy or whatever the new normal is, as people have been talking about. And I think that's what we want to talk about is how do you, if you are going to have virtual meetings, virtual events of any kind, how do you get yourself set up correctly for those so that they're efficient and successful events all told. And so what's the first thing, Doug, that you think about when you are going to host a virtual event of any kind?
Well, I guess the first thing to do is to look at what we're trying to achieve and ask ourselves, well, why would we use a virtual event or these online meeting tools anyway? So, is it something where we can just go and see the person, or is it something we can achieve with a phone call? And clearly, particularly in the current environment, there are so many use cases where those options aren't really going to cut it, particularly when you've got multiple people involved and you want to communicate across a broad number of people. So, part of your planning process is to understand what it is that you want to communicate, and therefore what are the best tools that you have available to you to achieve that. And I think then it's a matter of making sure that you choose a technology platform and you familiarise yourself with that. So just in the intro there, you were saying that we're going to really address more of the commercial business oriented online event tools that are out there. So, Ray, what are the most common ones in use by small business today?
Sure. So after you've done all of your planning and you understand what type of event you're hosting, hopefully you have an agenda. I really like agendas for all meetings, for that matter. But I think it's really important that if you're going to have a virtual event, it's important to kind of key people into what you're going to do. And that does, as you said, lead to, as you said, Doug, leads you to thinking about the technology and the tools that are out there. As Barry noted in the lead-in, we have this increased popularity of what was before kind of a niche software, Zoom, and now I had been using Zoom for several years before the pandemic hit, and I've been using it with aplomb. I've really enjoyed the tool. It's a fantastic tool for a lot of different use cases, and so Zoom does have both a meeting capability for one-to-one meetings, group meetings, and a webinar product where you can go ahead and have a one-to-many communication with your audience. And so Zoom is obviously a great choice and a great tool. But we have many others that have been mainstays for many, many years. For me, I tend to recommend one of three products when I'm doing any kind of event, and they tend to be for meetings, Zoom, then Microsoft Teams or some kind of Skype alternative, which is Skype Business, Microsoft Teams, and Skype itself, Skype Premium. All three allow you to have group meetings where you can do all the things you need to do, which is allowing people in by phone, allowing people to connect by broadband internet, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, being the Google Small Business Advisor for productivity, I would be not myself if I didn't offer Google's enterprise solution, which is Google Meet. And they've actually added a bunch of new features in just the past week. The ability to bring in tiled view for people up to 16 people on screen. They've brought a whole bunch of other fun pieces into the mobile interface and things of that nature. So they're doing really good work because they see Zoom's competition really taking over. Zoom went from 10 million users before the crisis happened. Now they're at 200 million users, and so you can see that they've really risen to the occasion, and they're doing some really great work. So those tend to be the three big tools that I always talk about. Doug, what are some of the other tools that are kind of tried and true tools out there? And maybe if you're hosting more than just a meeting, what are some of the other tools that you think about that come to mind in terms of maybe doing webinars or other kinds of larger events?
Well, traditionally, the tools that most businesses and corporates were using were tools like WebEx and GoToMeeting. And it's interesting. I don't think I've bumped into anybody inviting me to WebEx or GoToMeeting meetings for some time. And I think the landscape has shifted quite a bit, and people are tending to use Zoom and Teams much more frequently, I think, in that corporate space. And that's obviously got a lot to do with the fact that they've improved the product considerably. Meetings, Teams was previously Skype for Business, which was the commercial variant of Skype. And, you can certainly see the difference in the quality of the infrastructure when you're using these tools, particularly when you're stitching up people from different parts of the country and even different parts of the world. And I think one of the things as a business that you want to make sure of is that you're able to choose the right tools and choose the meeting technology which has got the right infrastructure quality behind it, because there's nothing worse than being in a meeting where signals get they go a little bit wonky, they get attenuated, they get really laggy, signals get very choppy. I've seen that when people have been in business meetings using the regular consumer grade Skype, and it's just awful, and it can really detract from the meeting. So one of the things to think about here is just the quality of the infrastructure that sits behind it. WebEx and GoToMeeting are obviously very good, but I also think Teams is excellent. And I've had quite a few situations where people have been using the consumer grade Skype, and then we've switched across to Teams or Skype for Business. And the difference has been just night and day. The quality is so different. And I think what we're seeing nowadays too is that, particularly with products like Teams, a lot of people have got Teams as part of their regular email, $7 or $8 a month license, and it's a great service that's sitting right there under the bonnet. So, yeah, the other ones that I'm familiar with are those WebEx and GoToMeetings, but I think there's certainly a difference in the infrastructure quality, and I think you've got to think about the points of presence that the meeting technology provider, the online meeting provider, has, because if they've got lots of points of presence around the world, then signal strength is going to be good. It won't be too laggy. It won't be too attenuated. Whereas if everything has got to go back and forth between North America, for example, or back and forth between Singapore or a single point of presence, then you've got a much different user experience. I don't know if because you're in North America, Ray, you probably don't see those things. But what's your exposure to that?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with any of the the issues associated with that. I know that in other parts of the country there is a lacking in broadband infrastructure, and so I do travel to regions where that's an issue. But whenever I'm actually consuming, that means attending a webinar or anything else like that, I'm usually in my own office, and so I have a pretty good experience generally. I do see other people who have problems when they're presenting webinars, and that just goes to show what you're talking about, which is I, as a participant and attendee, I see the reduced experience when the presenter or the host or facilitator loses signal or is unable to present well. And I've also been on many webinars where, while my infrastructure is fine, everything's working, the servers don't work or the software glitches or something like that. No offense against Citrix GoToWebinar, but I've been on so many of them where the platform kind of has a meltdown, and therefore I'm not able to effectively communicate to the audience, and I have to dial in by phone or log out and log back in. I've had that problem with Cisco's WebEx before. So far, knock on wood, I've not had any of those problems with Zoom Webinar and or with going live on any of the major platforms like Facebook Live or YouTube Live or otherwise. Last year, I hosted a large virtual conference, what I call a live remote conference, since it was all live. There was no pre-recorded anything, and all the attendees were live. And so we had a circumstance where I was very concerned about making sure we had uptime across the board, and we used both Zoom Webinar, Zoom itself, and YouTube Live to bring all of those pieces for the video part to our attendees. And just remarkably, everything worked. And so I'm very pleased with that part of it. For those who may be of interest about some other products that are out there on the market, if you don't know about Webinar Jam, Webinar Jam is a tool that's out there that's highly rated. It's a very good tool. Think about if you're doing a kind of smaller one-to-one type meetings, there's a tool called Whereby, which, like the location where something is, where, and then by, B-Y. So Whereby is a tool that people can use. Citrix, of course, has GoToMeeting, GoToWebinar, and a smaller tool called Join.me. And Join.me is just a quick tool for being able to have smaller meetings. So those are available. There's also a tool called Big Marker. And Big Marker is another one that's out there that has a lot of really great functions, including the ability to host a virtual conference or a virtual summit, something like the live remote conference that I hosted. So multi-session, multi-day type of product that's available there. In that list is a tool called Livestorm. Livestorm is another kind of tool that's out there for webinar stuff, and that allows for evergreen webinars also, so you can record a single webinar and then have multiple events that keep happening based on that same recorded video. And one that I really like, and I've seen being used quite often, is one called Crowdcast. And Crowdcast allows you to be able to do, again, multi-session and included multi-day kinds of summits where you have multiple speakers, multiple sessions, multiple presentations running within the environment, and having many users, many attendees in that space, communicating and collaborating by chat. So there's a whole host of tools, and so if anybody has any questions about any of them, I've had experience with many of them as an attendee and as a host across the board, so folks can ask questions and I'll be happy to answer those questions.
Is your computer driving you crazy? Is it slow or doing things you didn't expect? Well, having a computer crash or pick up a virus can be a complete nightmare for a business, so having someone local you can trust to get you up and running again is critical. The dedicated team of experts at Computer Troubleshooters Toowoomba West will put your mind at ease from the moment you walk through the door, and will get your problem solved in no time with a 100% guarantee on their work. Laptops, tablets, PCs, whatever you have, Roger and the team can fix it for you. So visit them today at 236 Bridge Street, Newtown. Can't get in to see them? No worries. Just call them on 4642 1331 and they'll come to you. Toowoomba Troubleshooters Toowoomba West on the web at www.computertroubleshooters.com.au/Toowoomba West.
Hi, I'm Neil from CGD Group, and we do printing with imagination. Our products and imaging have that wow factor. Whether it be business cards, flyers, the Coffee Gazette, or our brand new A5 video folders and animation. Have your business branding remembered. Call us today on 4639 5553. CGD Group, printing with imagination.
Looking for exposure for your next event or function? Take your next community event, training seminar, sports event, official opening, function, concert or exhibition live to the world with PTV Channel O and Power FM's unique live simulcast. We can turn your next local event into a worldwide sensation for a fraction of what you would expect to pay. No matter what the event, PTV Channel O and Power FM can take your message to our audience. Invite the world to your party by phoning 0431 390 920 or email feedback@ptvchannelo.com.
So that takes us along, Doug, to the next step, which is really fundamentally getting people to register and attend. And when we talk about attendance, getting people onboarded to the tool that we're using and all of those things, what's some guidance that you can give to people in that camp?
Well, Ray, we've all been there, haven't we? Where you kick off at the allotted time, and then there is always that sort of subset of attendees that this is the first time they've looked at your instructions and maybe decided to go ahead and download the app if it's an app that they don't already have, and then they're in a bit of a hurry and they don't read everything, and then the next thing you know they're trying to call you on the phone and say, "Hey Ray, hey Doug, how do I load up Teams, or how do I get WebEx working?" And it's just a nightmare. So, Ray, we were talking before this about the importance of sending out instructions, and I guess the other thing is getting people to maybe if it's a really important event, maybe just have a test run before we actually do the big event itself. So people have an opportunity to download the software, implement it, go back to their teams, go back to their support folks for the different providers, whether it's WebEx, GoToMeeting, Teams, or whatever, Zoom, and make sure that they've got the application up and running the way they'd like it to function, so that when it comes time to attend the meeting, they basically just have to open up the calendar invitation and click on the hyperlink, and essentially they know that it's going to launch because they've already done it. So Ray, from your perspective, how do you go about that? How sort of deep do you go into providing the instructions, and how do you do it a half hour before? Do you do it the day prior? How do you sort of set up the the onboarding, if you like, if they're not used to using these tools?
Yeah, so I'm probably a little bit on the overkill side. So I like to provide more instruction than less. That's useful to some people. Sometimes it feels, micromanaging on another level for some folks who are maybe more tech savvy and willing to kind of roll with the punches. But for most people, I think they find it useful, and so I do it in the registration process. I usually always have a registration process of some kind, even if it's a calendar invitation to that virtual event, so that they can, in some way, shape, or form, let me know that they're going to attend. This is, again, one of those cases where we keep a lot of things in our head, and so we are usually very comfortable with knowing if I have very few events in any given week, I know where I need to be, and I know where I need to go, and those are all held in our mind's eye because of the location of where we need to go. When we are in a virtual environment, we lose that capacity, because if we're sitting at our desk all day and we're attending events with people all over the world, we don't know where we need to be by location anymore, because location is me sitting at my desk. So the calendar event ends up being very vital to holding that information to get us where we need to go. And so one is I always put the link to where we need to go in the location field of the event so that no matter what application they're using, they have a clickable event to be able to go to. And if you put a link also in the description of, in like the notes section of the event, what you need to do is make sure that if you are in an application that doesn't automatically hyperlink it, make sure that you like tap the space bar after the end of the link or highlight it and make sure that you hyperlink that text so that the people on the other side don't just see text, but they see a clickable link on the other side that they can go ahead and click on. You might think that's a minor issue, but it's a huge time waster, and it flummoxes a lot of people on the other side from just getting into the event because they can't click on the link and they don't know what they're supposed to do with that. So just knowing that there's a hyperlink and making sure that there's a hyperlink is really important. 2 is I provide instructions. I've written out templates for all of the platforms that I use, and I just copy and paste those same instructions to everybody. It tells them how to download the client, how to test the client in a test meeting, how to get support from the platform that we're using, and how to use backup options. So for example, in Zoom, there's a phone dial-in option. It's not the best option for being able to meet with me because I like the idea of being in a video meeting and meeting with you face-to-face. And certainly in our trainings where we do virtual training in Zoom, we don't use Zoom webinar for those. We actually use a Zoom meeting, and that means everybody is on video and camera, and then I can share my screen. And now it's just like being in a workshop environment. I want to be able to see your face. I want to be able to talk to you. I want you to be able to talk to me while I'm presenting the material. Different than a webinar where I'm broadcasting information and maybe having Q&A at the end. A workshop or a seminar environment where you're going to sit with me for 3 hours, maybe 6 hours of the day and work through an issue. You can't be just text on the screen. You need to be a real person with everyone else, and it gives you an opportunity to network and other things like that. So I give the people instructions. I give them the guidance to be able to do that. I'm hosting several virtual conferences this year, and in that process, we actually are recording videos that walk people through the environment. Literally, like think of it as like a physical space, like a conference hall. Think of that conference hall being represented in a digital space, and I actually am recording screen captures, screen recordings of the environment and telling people, okay, this is the exhibit hall, and these are the breakout rooms, and these are where all of the tracks are in the breakout rooms, and this is where you can go to get guidance. This is the networking lounge and the different places people can go throughout the event. So screen recordings are very, very useful, and those are sent out sometimes weeks, if not a couple days before the event, so that people can get themselves set up, create accounts, all of those kinds of things. Get people acclimated to the systems before they get there. That way they show up on time and they show up prepared and ready to be able to get access and get the experience that they really deserve for those events. Again, it depends on the size of the event. That level of high touch point is probably more for a conference, and we could talk about those in future episodes. But for just a meeting, you still want to be able to give people access to the client link so they can download it, install the client on their mobile device, on their desktop, and otherwise, and be prepared to do that. Now, if you're using Google Meet just uses the browser, so you don't need a separate application on the desktop, but it does need a client on the mobile device. So you need to let people know, if you're meeting with me on desktop, no problem, just click on the link and you'll be brought into the room. But if you want the best experience, you should probably install the Google Meet app on your mobile device, and that will give you the best experience there. And so it's just about guiding people through the process of what they're going to experience. And so as you talked about, Doug, it's really important for you to go ahead and test and rehearse so that you can see what is it that other people are going to experience when they go ahead and log in, experience what they're going to experience, and then write the instructions and give guidance based on that. And I can't think highly enough of the notion of rehearsal and just going through the process of, you don't have to do the whole presentation, but just going in, pretending to host the environment, see what it's like, have someone come in and ask a question, send a chat message, run through some problems and problem scenarios and how you're going to deal with it. And you're going to have a better meeting for it. It's going to be a much more productive use of everyone's time if you work through the technology issues before they happen. It's just a real, reality.
Have you got a wedding, birthday, corporate event, or even a school disco coming up? Well, make your special occasion memorable. A professional DJ and compere really makes a difference, so go crazy! With Crazy Kevin, International DJ. He's available for all your entertainment needs. Just call 0459 336 832 or email crazykevindj@gmail.com.
Oz Hosting is proud to support Switched On IT in bringing practical help to Australian businesses. We're talking to literally hundreds of businesses every day about their IT services, how to make them more efficient, how to make their businesses more efficient, and how to protect their valuable data. If you'd like your IT services securely hosted right here in Australia and expertly managed, talk to Oz Hosting.
Morning, good morning, love to see the sunrise. Crazy Kevin on the radio. Power FM.
powerfmradio.com.au.
So after that, you go live. You have a wonderful event, and that's all great. And you facilitate a great event. You facilitate a great meeting. Everybody's excited. They're walking away with what they needed to: action items, new projects, new information from the webinar or otherwise. What happens after that, Doug? What should people do after the virtual event ends?
Well, after having comprehensively gone through the agenda, Ray, I would imagine that post the meeting, I guess that's where the rubber meets the road in terms of, you've conducted the webinar. You've done it for a reason. You've had an objective. You've had a goal, and if you're a business, it's probably communicating either with vendors or customers and potential customers. And as we all know, once you've done that, then there is probably going to be a lot of follow-up that ensues from doing that. So then it's a matter of thinking, well, what are the sensible ways that you can do the follow-up? If it's a real one-to-many meeting, you might think about using some of the tools to understand exactly what people got out, what the attendees got out of the meeting. So maybe there's a SurveyMonkey or tools like that you can use to contact your attendee base and find out whether they got what they were hoping to get out of the meeting. And I guess if it's a little bit more salesy, it's then a matter of also email and more personal tailored follow-ups to make sure that people have understood what was intended to be communicated. And of course, there's inevitably a huge range of questions that people are going to have coming out of something like that after they've been through it and had time to sort of think about it again and go back to their office, and there'll be other things that they need to do. So, from a commercial standpoint, I would imagine one of the most important tasks is to try and get some true commercial value from the webinar that you've gone to all that trouble of creating. So Ray, from your perspective, what are the tips and hints and tools that you use to do that sort of post-meeting follow-up?
Yeah, you bring up a lot of great points, and one of the tools that I really enjoy using is Google Forms. We are, again, a G Suite business, so we use Google Forms in our own world and send out surveys and quizzes. If you're doing any kind of learning, information-based teaching in your, virtual event, testing people on what they've learned is really helpful. Also collecting feedback. So did you learn what I intended for you to learn in the meeting? Was the meeting the information that you expected based on the agenda that was provided or the marketing materials that were sent out? All of those things are really useful for being able to improve upon your own business. And so I think that just surveying attendees is really helpful. I like to send a survey right at the end of the webinar so that people have the link while they're in attendance, just sending the link directly through the webinar tool so they can take the webinar survey right then and there, or a quiz so they can figure out what they learned from it and then ask questions directly in the quiz so that you can respond back to them and get them information if they need to. And then also sending an email afterward saying, hey, did you watch the webinar? What did you get out of it? And how could we improve in the future? And maybe what are some other topics you'd like to hear, which can be a really great use for, I'd really like to have a meeting about X, or I'd really like to hear you talk about Y. This can be incredibly helpful. Another tool that I like using is one called CrowdSignal. So you've heard us talk about WordPress before, and I'm a huge WordPress advocate. And so open source software generally, but in this particular case, WordPress, the open source software, is produced by the company Automattic, and another one of the tools that they use is called CrowdSignal, and it used to be called Polldaddy. And so CrowdSignal is open source software, but it's also a free tool. You can pay for different varying versions of it, but CrowdSignal has a free plan, and you can actually do polls, surveys, and otherwise on the platform. So really, really great tool, and you can do those kinds of surveys on the system. So lots of really great options out there in terms of running surveys. You said SurveyMonkey, Doug, and that's available to you. Also remember that a lot of the tools that you're using, if you're using a CRM, like Salesforce or HubSpot or otherwise, those actually have their own survey tools built into them as well. So think about using the tools that you already have as opposed to using an independent tool, because then your data is going to be synchronized. And I'm all about synchronizing data. So you want to make sure that if you're going to select a tool, look to the tools that you already have to pull that data into your own system, or the data that already exists in your system. So for example, if your system is going to be able to send out a link and it's going to auto recognize the attendee so that that's now connected to their profile, I would much rather you use that system than the built-in webinar tool.
Yeah. That's terrific. I think we've covered a lot of bases in terms of conducting online meetings, whether it's one to a few or one to many, and the different tools there. Barry, have you got any questions for us about using these tools?
No, I don't think so. I think that you've covered all of that pretty thoroughly. We've talked about kinds of tools that you can use and the critical issues of making sure that it all actually works before you start. I've used many of those tools for a long time when I came back from Japan about 10 years ago, and I was setting up an online school for teaching English. I was using some of those tools to do that. And I know from that experience, because we were very fresh at it at that time, and I know from that experience that if you don't test it all before you start, it can be an absolute disaster, of which we had several. Very critical. Of course, we also use tools within this show to do lots of virtual things like this show and other shows like the TRL Footy show, which is going to be on tomorrow night. And so, no, I think we've pretty well covered that today. Any final thoughts from either of you?
Just that again, we'll emphasise the rehearsal, because it is just such a frustrating experience when you've got attendees that can't log in and they want you to help them get there. So I totally, I think what Ray has done, being very diligent about having copious, instructions on all the different types of platforms, is really great advice.
Ray, final comments?
No, I think we covered it all. I think it's really important to plan out what you're going to do it, and then review what you've done. And I think that translates, very well to virtual events. And if you're looking for other tools and presentation software and other things like that, feel free to reach out to us, and we'll be happy to give recommendations and all that fun stuff. And good luck.
Terrific. Thank you, Doug Endersby in Sydney and Ray Sidney Smith in Washington, D.C. Are you in Washington today?
I am not. I'm not in Washington for a while, at least until the pandemic is over. But
Okay.
I'm there in spirit. I'm there in spirit.
You're there in spirit. Okay. All right. So thank you, both of you, for your time today, and we will see you again next week. You've been watching Switched On IT. We've been talking today about virtual meetings. This has been another of the shows in the coronavirus series that we've been running on Switched On IT. It's really critical that we begin to understand the sorts of things that we can use, not just during the coronavirus, but at other times as well, that help to connect us. One of the things that I'm hearing a lot of now is the connectedness of people. For a long time, we felt like IT was a bit of an intrusion into our lives and disconnected us. We're now seeing a turnaround in some of those concepts, and people are starting to see that IT can actually connect us and keep us connected, and especially when we don't have other connections. Now, if you have missed any of this series on the coronavirus, or for that matter, any of our Switched On IT shows for the last couple of years, you can pick up any of those in our video on demand section. Just go down the left-hand side of this site and you'll find the link that takes you to the past shows. If you've got any questions, any comments, anything that you would like to know, any problems that you have that you'd like us to deal with, please be sure to either go to our contact form on this site and let us know what your questions are, or send us an email to feedback@ptvchannelo.com. This has been Barry for Switched On IT. We'll see you again next week.